Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Reed Riggs, he, him.
I am Dr. Diane Neubauer, she, her, and you are listening to the first episode of season 3 of Conversations about Language Teaching. We wanted to pause here at the beginning of a new season to just remind viewers and listeners and ourselves about why we're here, what the scope of this podcast is, and why you might want to listen.
So Diane and I both have PhDs in language learning related fields. Mine is in second language. Technically, it's in East Asian languages and literatures with a focus on corpus methods that ties to research approaches in second language acquisition that focus on kind
So
of general.
real
It's
easy to just say what you studied there. Is that what you're saying?
It's not easy. Yeah, I kind of came at it from a side field, but I made my research and my dissertation focused on a very core and growing field within second language acquisition that is often called usage-based approaches. So looking at actual language usage that learners are exposed to and that they produce over time to take measures of how language develops in their minds. And then there's another aspect to it, which is what they do socially between each other. And that brings in conversation analysis that we had a whole episode about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's who you are kind of as a scholar and by education. And then what are you doing now?
I'm a teacher. Teaching at an IB school, teaching Mandarin, grades 9 through 12, and working on sort of figuring out the standards for the IB system for language acquisition. And I'm currently starting this year. I'm a subject area lead for Japanese and Chinese. And so I'm digging through what our standards are. And there's a lot of emphasis on authentic texts. And I'm trying to figure out kind of what role they should play, how I can bring up my own teaching to those standards in our rubrics, and also how to lead the other teachers in understanding what those are in a meaningful way, not in a window dressing type of way where it's like, oh, they want this just written on our unit plans. Okay, we'll write what? Okay, write whatever. Okay, good, done. Now go back to my teaching. I actually want to figure out how to implement it in a way that aligns with my research perspectives and awareness of national standards and prior teaching experience and a lot of that. So that's where I'm currently at.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, Dan?
And I am, let's see, my PhD was 2 years ago now. Finished in 2022, and that was on language education, mainly thinking of the context being the North America, maybe Canada and the US especially, particularly the US, but also studying international contexts for language learning where the language isn't as prevalent. So, for example, learning French in Paraguay, somewhere where Spanish and other languages are more dominant than that one. So like looking at different ways that people add an additional language at different ages, particularly through language education contexts. So I'm thinking a lot about schools, teachers, students, programs at schools, issues involved in making them better, in what makes them challenging, in dealing with that as the context most of the time, because I think it's fascinating. And I am into that because I taught for 10 years at the K-12 level, Mandarin Chinese, and 3 different schools mainly. And also since that 10-year time period, I've been teaching online classes in Mandarin Chinese, mainly to adults, some teens and preteens as well. But I keep my language teacher thing going by continuing to teach online. I'll do it again. I'm taking a little kind of sabbatical from online language teaching right now because my current situation is I am a clinical assistant professor of multilingual education at the University of Louisville. And I'm saying it the way that a local should. So approximately, there's some very various things. It is definitely never Louisville, although that's the way the city is spelled. You can say Louisville if you want to, but now I wanted to jump right in and sound like I was a local and said Louisville.
Louisville. Okay, Louisville. Okay.
Louisville. It's almost like a 2-syllable long thing. Yeah. So go Cards. And I'm enjoying that. So I've been there for about 2 months now and kind of figuring out what my responsibilities are. My role there is related to teacher education in the broad sense. Some of the classes I teach right now are focused on English as a second language preparation courses for people who are adding that as a certification to their prior teacher's license. So a lot of the people I teach now are in MA programs and they're getting that specialist credential. A number of others that I'm teaching this semester are either pre-service or just in-service teachers that aren't planning to be language teachers, but they have multilingual children in their classrooms, and they really need to be able to think like a language teacher, in essence, especially when working with those students. But I think it's broadly helpful. If you're teaching children, they are still language learners. Adults are language learners, but if you're teaching a new subject area or you're introducing somebody to specialized skill sets in speaking or reading or science, or there's specialized vocabulary and forms of language in that. So I'm telling them now, they're all language teachers.
Yeah.
They just didn't realize they signed up for that. So, as far as I'm concerned, the best thing to be is language teacher. So I'm happy for them to join us, but so I'm helping them to really think through some of the issues of how does a new language develop? How do they adapt their teaching instruction to make that more effective? And it's fun for me. I'm having a good time so far. So
that's great.
Yeah. And then we've both done a research project together that is still kind of ongoing. We've got some plans for things out of that.
Yep.
But we've also done other research projects independently or with other folks.
Yeah.
And we've both been involved a lot in teacher training and teacher development. So some of the things that we've just referenced in here are in past episodes in greater depth and detail. So season 1 and 2 have some of that. But our purpose of this podcast is not really to be extremely systematic or what we're doing is having organic conversations around some sort of a theme related to language teaching that one of us or maybe both of us were kind of drawn to, either because of something arising in our own teaching, something we'd read, something we're seeing talked about in social media among language teachers or researchers. And we love to be able to bring both a little bit of our research knowledge and our teaching experiences and our experiences as language learners as well, all together in a kind of organic flow as we record a podcast episode.
Yeah, these are things that we discuss whenever as friends, I think that we knew that we had a lot to say, so why not record a podcast and share it with more people? It's just, we've been reading a lot of the same people, following the same teacher groups, involved in the same professional organizations, reading a lot of the same research. So we just thought, that sounds like we have something we could offer. Yeah. People could use. Yeah. So trying to keep it appealing enough to somebody who doesn't have specialized advanced degrees in all these things, but bringing some of the insights out of that for a practitioner audience, but also thinking in terms very much centered on real people, real world language needs and stuff too. So and an actual teacher audience, we're actually that's who's central to this. If researchers ever listen to it, I actually hadn't thought about that. It wasn't on the forefront of my mind. I think I'm careful. I'm careful for that audience. And and in Hawaii, I graduated, got my PhD at the University of Hawaii, and I still go to a lot of the local teacher conferences. And those professors who I worked with there will also go.
Both levels, right?
And so, And so I'm always a little bit, it's on my radar. What would they ding me on? Or what would they, would they, if such and such professor is at my talk, wouldn't they call me out on this? And so it's always still on my radar that academic folk are, I wouldn't want to offend any of them unless I intend to offend them, and then it's still intentional.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Should we
so
jump into
some
this
bridge
topic?
building kinds of things across topics and across.
That is the metaphor we've often used, is bridges that go back and forth. Bridges. It is super common that researchers will research classrooms, not for the benefit of the teacher specifically or the students, but to gather data to then learn something about the process of education or mental processes or social processes, things like that. And then it contributes to some bigger body of research that wasn't really intended to feed back to the teacher.
Right.
So
And we think that's okay.
That's fine.
That's also a worthy endeavor.
It's its own purpose. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, we want to also be able to listen in on those conversations and bring some of the highlights of them into the classroom and to the attention of teachers.
Yeah. And it's a human endeavor. So we don't have an apparatus that says, here is the objective, perfect way to bring research findings back to teachers. We're going with our gut. I mean, that's what this, that's why it's a podcast. Podcasts are about the gut.
Yes. And maybe a quick thank you to those who have responded to things from season 1 and 2. I had recently somebody told me that they came across our podcast and started listening, and then realized that he knew me and we had met in person. And so it's really delightful to hear about people outside of our immediate circles of teaching, getting that. So I'm excited to see listenership from around the world.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. Should we jump into our topic?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. So today's topic is about, authentic texts, and I'm leading this one. So I got some things together. The first thing I thought of was my own resources that I'm dabbling in authentic texts with my students. But I remembered reading about in this book, enacting the work of language instruction. I'm reading backwards on my screen here. High leverage teaching practices. So this is kind of seen as the main actful book on HLTPs. It's the first of 2 books. There's a second
HLTPs
book
being that
high leverage teaching practices.
And did you say the authors yet?
These are Gleason and Donato.
Okay.
And this book is really a gleaning of lots of other research. Some of it, there's been high leverage teaching practices is a special term that is referring to research-based practices that either were drawn from research or more typically fed through a research process. There's something teachers already did and talked about doing, but then researchers would go and, observe and take notes and analyze in some way. And so just because a teacher says, oh, I think this is high leverage, that's not the term HLTP. The term HLTP is really much a research tied thing. It's not really tied to second language acquisition research specifically. It's coming more from an education perspective. And so I want to start, what I find useful here is this definition of authentic text, and I'm choosing it because I like it. This is a subjective choice that I've made. It aligns with me, what I think. So to give a definition here, texts, be they printed, audio, or video, that are created for various social and cultural purposes by and for monolingual, bilingual, or multilingual users of the target language and various other cultural groups. The term authentic, when referring to foreign language classrooms, also implies that the text has not been simplified or edited for the purpose of foreign language instruction. I don't know if I need to read this. Let's see. Additionally, authentic texts, in the way the term is used in this chapter, have a sociocultural purpose, e.g. to inform, entertain, argue, teach a life lesson, that goes beyond simply providing contrived, artificial, and unmotivated examples of the target language to learners, as in the case of most textbook material. So that's kind of my jump off point, is that it's nice what they put in there. It also adds to Bill Van Patten's definitions of purpose.
It does.
So they throw a few more in there. And he even says in that chapter in while we're on the topic, published through Actful, was that 2017?
2016, I think, but right around there, yeah.
Yeah. So he even says at the end of his section about purpose, this probably isn't all there is to say about purpose, but this is what we can start with. And so Can
I jump to one part of that I think is really, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't remember their definition there. They did not note that they did not say that these are texts created by native speakers for native speakers.
That's why I chose
and
this.
That I think was an older term or an older definition of authentic resources. They talked about monolingual, bilingual, multilingual users of the target language, right? Something like that. Users of the target language. So that's excellent. So it does not have to come from and for a native speaker audience exclusively.
So we can, let me give a sort of tangent to that. which is that teachers can say, well, if I want to be authentic, I'm a human being, and my students are human beings, and we are becoming multilingual. And so by this definition, I should be able to write my own texts for my students. And I would say you can define it that way. You can, but you're missing out on what I want to get into about some of the nice, good, useful purposes of authentic texts. And I want to talk more about maybe we call them found texts, like
Found
texts
text.
that
I was
are,
going to
I like
bring
that
that up.
term. It's a little more,
Me
it's
too.
a little more useful for what they're trying to get at here.
Yeah. Found
Um,
instead of created
Found instead of,
texts,
yeah, I mean,
created
every
for
text,
the language learner
yeah,
in
yeah,
a context,
yeah.
but just found and like, oh, milked for
It's
the language learner's
Yep.
purposes. But
Yep. So I think one of the first purposes, well, like they said, these purposes here that they list, yeah. So to inform, to entertain, to argue, to teach a life lesson. So I want to I'm going to look at some examples here and talk about them. But a corpus perspective, meaning looking at actual documentation of language usage, really quickly points out that words have peculiar places of usage in, when people use the language. So here's an example. I passed out. So when I was in China in 2018 with my family, I took a lot of photos. Any sort of sign with Chinese characters on it, I had lots and lots and lots of photos. And so one of them is from the panda base in Chengdu. And
that's
it
a fun
says,
place.
it's a fun place. It's current pandas. And then it's got two signs. It's got a little picture of these two pandas. And it says their name. It's in 4 languages. It's in Chinese characters are the biggest. And then next to it is Pinyin. And then they have English. Oh, sorry, that's not Pinyin. That's English, because everything else has English, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. Chinese is the prominent one, and the other texts are less bolded and kind of smaller. And so that's also kind of a linguistic landscape research area. How are some languages given prominence in a certain place, which highlights a sort of preference for those speakers, or a sort
Which
of dominance.
one's prestigious, maybe?
Yeah, prestigious.
Which languages they think should also be included there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in Barcelona, we just came back this summer. In Barcelona, it was Catalan that had the big bolded prominence on all the signs, and Spanish, if present, was smaller and not bolded, and a lot of signs just had no Spanish. It was just Catalonian. So it shows you which languages are valued the most there, or which readers get the most preference.
Yeah, or at least what's officially accepted on signage.
Sure.
Sometimes some places it might, what's up on the sign might not be what people do in their homes too.
Yeah, there's some kind of effort going on there then. So a student asked me when we were reading this, there's a description underneath the second panda that says Mausa bai bai da, which means fur color, white. And my student said, wait, we learned colors before. I thought it's bai sa. And I said, yeah, that means white. And she goes, why does this say bai bai da? And I said, well, that's another way to say it. And she goes, when do I say it one way and when do I say it another way? And I said, I'm kind of paraphrasing at this point. I don't know how much of this is just me imagining the conversation, to be honest. But this is what I'm getting at, is what I took away from that exchange is they said it this way here. Now you've seen a context in which they said it this way. And we won't know again in what contexts it's used one way or another until we see those contexts. Mm-hmm. And for me to tell you something like, oh, in this context, it's always bai bai da. And in those contexts, it's always bai sa da. That would be an overgeneralization. And I'm basicly lying. Like if I say, and I use this example, like, cause it's meant to sound absurd. If someone visited from a little farm and just never saw the outside world, and I said, okay, let me teach you about humans. Men have short hair and women have long hair. I'm lying.
Yeah.
It's just not true. And you could point to a bunch of examples and say, see, there's a pattern. It doesn't matter. It's so contingent. It's so dependent on the person and the context. You have to build up lots and lots of exposures to start to get a sense of when and where. And even then it's still kind of free. It's still kind of free and open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that not only are grammar rules not something that you can really rely on, that are really actually descriptive, but also vocabulary usage and definitions.
That's absolutely it. And even just like, when is it this word in this form versus this word in another form? So Yeah, so that's one. It's just where
Yeah.
is where how are words used? That's the nutshell of it. How are
Yeah.
words used? And I haven't found one yet, but I want to find a couple of emails that are real because I'm looking for tone. I want some that are maybe a little more humorous and friendly, and some
Hmm.
that are a little more serious, so that we can talk about that. We can say, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay," and
The
we can,
difference. How is
yeah,
that communicating that?
yeah.
Yeah.
How are words used to express these emotions or this formality? What's going on in this email? One thing that I would push against in this Gleason and Donato one is to give this model of the teacher sets the scene by saying, "Okay, you're traveling in this country and you see this sign." I don't like to do that for my students because it doesn't match reality. Like you're not. If I've had someone who has traveled and they want to share about their picture when they were traveling, that's reality.
Yeah.
But what am I teaching if it's just sort of made up puppetry?
Yeah.
Now, if we want to play, then we should really play.
Yeah.
But if you're treating it like we got to get serious, you're going to pretend you're in the country and now you have a context. You don't. That's
Hmm.
not a
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. You,
No,
you can't even imagine it if you've not really been there.
no.
You have a very limited window into what it's like. So it's better to be in your own context and
Yeah,
explore. This is a thing that you're looking at from the outside.
yeah. And
You're in a classroom. That's how that is.
I
Yeah.
tell my students, I took these photos when I traveled. I just tell them that.
Hmm.
And so I was waiting with my family. I saw this sign. I took a picture. There's this other one. It's a kind of a goth. Um, it's a sign. There's a shop I walked by in Beijing with my family, and there's a shop with a bunch of plastic skulls and kind of a World War I gas mask on a
Oh.
mannequin in like a black lace dress. And then there's this black skeleton hanging outside on a tree, and it's wearing like a black robe. And then there's a hiring sign. And so I took a photo of the whole shop and a close up of the hiring sign, and it really caught my students' attention. They're like, what's going on?" And so we read we
Yeah.
read the we read the sign together, and it's very humorous. It says hiring, 直说吧, like just say it. 我们要人,你要钱. We want people, you want money, and the ren and the qian are bigger fonts. So it's like we want
Yeah.
people, you want money, and so then it's 那就来看看. So come and take a look. 我们不跟你谈理想. So we're not going to talk about ideals with you or dreams. We're not going to talk about your dreams. 知道你的理想是不上班. We know your ideals or your dream is to not work. And then there's a phone number. There's nothing else said. It's just two phone numbers at the bottom and then the name of the company at the bottom of that. And so I
Interesting.
was explaining to my
Yeah.
students like this context all goes together. I'm glad I had the two photos because it's like, and I didn't teach my students the word goth, but they looked it up, and in their presentations about it, they used the word Goethe. And I didn't have enough context in the moment. I was like, "You said Goethe," and they're like, "Oh, I looked it up. Is that goth?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that word now. Yes, that is goth."
Yeah. Cool.
And so the takeaway is it's like Chinese people aren't one culture. Like you can have goths, and Beijing is a big international city, and so there'd be a more international influence. But those are some real soft skill cultural takeaways. It's like, oh, now you've seen that there are just individual subcultures of people living their fun lives, and that explains why the sign is this kind of humorous,
Yeah.
this humorous kind of thing here. It's like, hey, come get a job. Here's the phone number. Um, so
Yeah.
I think
Let's not
that,
pretend about this. You want money. We
yeah,
need people to work for us.
yeah. But
Yeah.
it's a like so to me, like when we talk about context, like that provides some context. A bigger photo
Yeah.
can provide context. But to ask the students to imagine, I'm literally
Yeah.
teaching it because they don't know about it. Why would I assume that they would accurately imagine a context that would make that make sense? Um,
Exactly.
so yeah, a lot of it also in there is, to me, it looks like it's based on ESL contexts where it's like full immersion,
Hmm.
and they'll even make little comments in Gleason and Donato where they're like, anytime you rely on the student's native language, you're undoing certain mental process. It's stuff where I'm like, you wouldn't know that. Like, how would you know what's going on in
Hmm.
their minds? I would love to have a more immersive classroom. I have classroom management issues. I have motivation issues. I have affective issues. So I use as much target language as I can. I set a timer where I'll say, we're just going to use the language for 10 minutes. And then I promise you we'll move on to the things that your grades are based on. That's the only way I can get them to participate in something for 10 minutes, just in the target language. And even by the end of
Yeah.
that, they get squirmy and start chatting with each other in English about unrelated things. So
Yeah.
I value the texts. The other methods about how to engage with the texts, it's a work in progress for me. When
Hmm.
I can be more engaged, more more immersive, I will be more immersive.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, it's like we're learning language, we're acquiring language. You can't get to that humorous hiring sign from grammar.
Mm-hmm.
You can't acquire a bunch of grammar through whatever methods, through traditional memorization, through TPRS, through just the teacher playing trash get ball and games or picture talk. Like you can't build up language and then know how to be humorous in another language. It comes from seeing examples of its usage, which is the same concept as it's just more input.
Yeah.
Like that's what's happening with authentic text. Let me pass it off to
Hey,
you. Yeah.
I had a question about the book. Did
Yeah.
they, I was trying to listen for it when they were defining what kinds of texts. Like I know that
Oh
they've
yeah.
mentioned video and what else?
The
Did they
text.
include photographs? That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, text be they printed audio or video that are created for various. I don't know what printed
Printed
means. I'm
audio.
guessing that could be because photos are great.
Written text? Yeah, I
Printed,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I
Mm.
have spoken to somebody who, at least at the time, she was a colleague of mine in graduate school. She was very pro authentic resource use. And I think at her school, they they mandated it. Like
Yeah.
we are only going to use found materials,
Only
although
use.
they called
Mm,
them authentic resources. And
sure.
but she said there were problems, and she was learning from the graduate program, like maybe this comprehensible aspect of this thing would help them.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that aside, one of the things that she said, though, even with her very high view of authentic resources, was that, oh, photographs count. Of course they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And so, oh, well, then when I'm talking in a comprehensible way with my students about a photo from the target language communities that we're introducing the students to, that you think that's use of authentic resources? And she's like, yeah.
Okay.
Like it's like she was
Good.
almost like, well, of course it
Yeah.
is. But I've heard people sometimes say like, well, that's not really
Oh,
enough or something, or to interact around the authentic resource without like reading lots of words or something. I think
oh,
there's, to me, the very best and the most accessible authentic resources are photographs and videos where it's not high in its language,
yeah.
but it's truly giving a
Yeah.
context for the
Yeah.
use of whatever language you do here. And it's giving us something to talk about as people in a classroom,
For sure.
learning about the
Yep.
world, about each other,
Yep.
entertaining ourselves through the use of the language and
Yeah.
building imaginative worlds and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And
So,
yeah, and cultural pictures will bring up um I mean in terms of ideas, it should spark ideas, be like, oh, people do that in that place. Like, oh, that's interesting. Like what's going on there?
yeah.
It can
And
also spark
as a teacher, I
language.
think
Yeah.
helping them to get in touch with those things so that they have that curiosity,
Yeah.
and giving them, maybe as somebody who has more cultural experiences and more of a background with the connections to the places that you're showing or the people you're showing, helping them to discern like, you're, so I see, if this happened here locally, you would think it meant this. Well,
Yeah.
I can
It
tell
doesn't
you from
mean
experiencing
yeah.
it 80
Yeah.
times that
Yeah.
it meant something else. So, yeah,
Yep.
kind of being a guide.
Mhm.
But yeah,
And it can also spark language, and you just have to be at the level of your students. And so like there's a this popped up on YouTube recently. There's a girl who was adopted from Pakistan by Chinese farmers when they were working in Pakistan. And she's recently started, she grew up with them like her whole, since being a baby, grew up on this farm in Hunan province. And so she's recently been posting, I think, to TikTok, but it shows up on YouTube. And she was interviewed on a TV show, but yeah, adopted, and she just speaks like Hunan dialect. Her Mandarin is great, but has a thick Hunan kind of accent to it. And uh, the first thing that came up to mind was like, oh, Chinese people would call her Xiaoshun because she's constantly making videos. I mean, it's filial, which is just such a
oh,
foreign
sure,
concept. Her videos are mostly about taking care of her parents.
yeah,
And so she's like, oh, I got a herbal foot wash. I'm washing my mom's feet. Oh, I made lunch. I'm feeding my parents lunch. And now she's trying to raise money to build a house for her parents. And so I
hmm
was like, and I read the comments, and it's often like, oh, ta, disher, how new heights. It's like this, people are like, this is a good daughter. Um,
hmm
so I was like, the word Xiaoshuan is useful here because I have to run it through my filter of like, is this useful when you talk to Chinese people? Is this a useful word when talking to Chinese people? In my experience, yes. That
Yes, I agree.
Xiaoshuan comes up a lot in conversations. Like, is that family is a big deal. We talk about family a lot among Chinese people in general. And Xiaoshuan just comes up a lot. Are you
I
filial? It
agree.
means, do you take care of your parents?
Yeah.
Are you obedient and caring of your parents?
Yeah.
Do you
Parents
listen to
and
them?
maybe the older
Yeah,
generations more generally too,
yeah,
having
yeah,
respectful
yeah.
behavior
Sure.
response. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's adjectives like that that I started to learn to add to my board. I had a board in the high school classroom where I had a bunch of different adjectives that we could use to describe people. They could self-describe, they could do that. But the first time I had it, I asked the students, what words do you feel like you want to know to say? And then I didn't really have initially on my radar, what are the ones that are commonly heard in Chinese context? And things like Shaoxun, but also 努力, like
Oh yeah,
hardworking.
yeah, yeah.
That one you hear a lot. That is such a praise word. And then the word like 乖, which
Mm,
might mean like obedient-ish or well-behaved of a child or a little
yeah,
pet animal.
right.
Like those, like get those up there
Hmm.
because that it's adjacent to authentic resources. It's like authentic description words and help the students understand these are see how this is being used
Yeah,
here and here and here and here.
yeah.
So you can experiment with that.
And this ties to your identity as an adjacent member of those communities. Like you as the teacher, you and I as teachers of the language we've spent time with those communities. Like we were in China for many years
Yep.
and
And around here too,
here
around where I
too.
live. Mhm.
Yep. Yep. And so those are judgments we can make just as similar to a native speaker moving from China and saying, let me share about my culture with you, is that we can say, oh, okay, well, we didn't grow up in the culture, but we spent a lot of time there. And so we can
Yeah.
share also something that's authentic to us with you. And so
Mhm.
we're not just, some, I don't know,
Yeah.
robot teacher.
Yeah. And as you had pointed out earlier, like you're introducing to a certain pocket of people's experiences. So I have certain ones because of where I lived and when I was and who I was. But even a native speaker has that same set of limitations. So like if I were representing English as a language, I can't make judgments for a whole lot of the United States or
No.
something, but I can say something about my own experience. And
Mhm.
that it seems like it's prevalent with this kind of person or,
Yeah.
you know,
We had a summer leader who wanted to sort of model that for teachers from, I think it was just China. And so she said, I need you to see what it's like to have a cultural experience and then teach about it in the classroom. So we're going to a baseball game today. And so they went off to
mm,
a baseball game. I arrived after that, but they wanted to bring me into the conversation about baseball as an American. And I said, I cannot contribute to this at all. I
yeah, the
am
sports
not.
balls are very interesting,
No.
I'm
Yeah,
sure, but
I can't. No, it doesn't matter that I'm American. Yeah. And we
my
had
mom
yeah.
informs me of sports games for the university where I am because
Oh, right.
I don't know. It's,
It's useful. Yeah. And it is useful to know a bit. Um, but yeah, we had a Chinese teacher who we were teaching about dim sum because we were going to take our summer students to a dim sum restaurant in Hawaii. And this teacher was from Beijing and she was saying, why are we teaching this? It's not Chinese. And I said, no, it's from Guangdong province. She goes, no, I'm from China. I've never heard of it. This is not Chinese. And I was like, you're from northern China. This is southern China. They're not the
yeah,
same. So every teacher,
wow.
yeah. Also accents. Teachers have different like regional accents. It could be a
Yeah,
southern Chinese accent. So it's not a bad thing. It just means like we all have different strengths and limitations, and we play to our strengths, and we
yeah.
we
And
work around
variations. It's not even
variations.
strengths or
No,
weaknesses or
yeah,
something all the time,
yeah,
some things might be outside our experience. That could
yeah.
be.
Wanted to share my
Yeah.
rubric as I'm working as a subject area lead for Chinese and Japanese that our IB language immersion teacher guide gives us these phase descriptors. And the phases in the IB system are um, the proficiency descriptors, and they're by the four objectives. And those are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so that's how we do it in the IB system. And if you're familiar with Actful, you'll hear kind of how it just reorganizes kind of a lot of the similar ideas. But for listening and reading, they're identical. Um, So we have at the emergent level, phases 1 and 2. It's called emergent level. Listening, letter I. Identify explicit and implicit information, parentheses, facts and or opinions, supporting details, end parentheses, in a wide variety of simple, authentic texts. This is II, so that's number 2. Analyze conventions in a wide variety of simple, authentic texts. And then number 3, analyze connections between a wide variety of simple, authentic texts. So all 3 of those like emphasize the authentic texts. And so it doesn't mean only use authentic texts. It just means there should be a lot of authentic texts in addition to whatever you're doing. And they maybe are more of like an end goal to work towards. What I often do is, for my 9th graders, I'll have a news article and I'll say, okay, our only goal for this is to be able to do things. We're going to have different listening, reading, speaking, and writing. We'll do different things with this. But you need to understand the title and one key sentence that I choose for you. And that's it. For 9th grade, it's like, it's a real news article. Here's the link. I have a separate document it tells us which parts to look for. I'm not doing vocab lists anymore, but I'm doing sentence breakdowns. And so I record a video where I have little phrases I pull out of it that I gradually put together. And in the video, I read it in Chinese. I explain it in English. It's their study guide. It's something that they can use. Instead of flashcards, they can use my video. Okay, so I'm going to skip capable. It's the phases 3 and 4. And I go to proficient. And they really just rework a little of the wording. So part 1, listening and reading again. It's the same for listening and reading. Part 1, identify explicit and implicit information, facts and or opinions, supporting details. That's the same. In a wide variety of complex authentic text. The only difference is the complex authentic text. So they're just saying that maybe it's a whole paragraph. I do that with my seniors that are getting ready for their big exams. Here's a real news article. Here's like the first 2 paragraphs and the final paragraph. Like that's what we're working with. It's still never the full news article, but
so that's going to take them a long time.
It takes much longer. Yeah, and I scale down a bit. I don't assign as much. Okay, part 2, analyze conventions in a wide variety of complex authentic text. The only difference is the word complex. And then part 3, analyze connections between a wide variety of complex authentic text. That's phases 5 and 6. We don't ever actually get there in the middle year program. That's grades 6 through 10. At grade, we really just try to get up to phase, I think, 4. And in there, the difference
just
is
before that, then.
Yeah, variety of simple and some complex authentic text. That's the only difference in wording. Simple and some. That's phases 3 and 4, the capable level. So, yeah, what I'm seeing is that like what I'll do is I'll say, here's this news article, and then I'll write my own, so-called inauthentic texts, learner texts that utilize a lot of the vocab that's going to come up, and in the meaning sense that it's going to be used in that. And so it's really just sort of like training wheels, preparation. It's sort of a pre-teaching, but it's more exposure so that when they get there, they feel a little more familiar. They feel a little less shaky. So, but
not jumping to the highest rung on the ladder, but taking steps up it to get ready for that final.
Because I know that these rungs are kind of far apart. So here's the one sentence from a news article about a campus that we have less than a minute. I'll just read it real quick. 无人机航拍学校建筑楼顶的一块块空中菜园, and then it's got the photographer's name. All of that is like high level language.
Yeah, specialized.
It's very specialized, but it comes up a lot when you keep reading news articles. And that means, let's see, a personless flight machine. That's a drone. Photographs, school buildings, rooftop, one piece of an air garden. And the article is about campuses. This one campus that put rooftop gardens on all their buildings so that the students could plant. And it's part of our unit about campus changes and who should have access, who should say what about changes to the campus, because we're having construction going on right now. So, overall, what I want is lots and lots of, overall, what I want is language development. And that's going to come from a lot of repeated exposure to routine uses of words in routine contexts that make sense for our classroom. And so the texts that I write for them are going to be something where I'm aware of kind of where we're at. And it's got a lot of repetition built into it because of how the topic develops in the text. We'll have discussions about pictures. So I don't really, I write texts that do target words. I don't target words so much outside of the text, but there's so much natural reuse of words. It's these little authentic texts that are just embedded into everything else that so far what I've seen is that I would not have thought to use those words in those ways. And so it keeps reinforcing it for me to want to keep using them. And for students also, they have questions about context. Like, so, is this normal? And I go, no, it's not very normal. Oh, is this can I say it this way? And I go, oh, if you're angry, you can say it that way. It's like, if you want to be funny, you could say it that way. It's like a lot of these questions about when and how to use words or what kinds of phrases to use just don't come up when it's me writing for them. And so it's just a different component of the learning, a different component of I would say, acquisition and development, because they are seeing how to use the language.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. That's all I've got.
Sounds good. Yeah. And I think you use authentic resources very much in a similar way to how I do, thinking of the context of how we're going to talk about something from target language communities in our classroom context. And yeah. Cool.
Well, I've been Reed Riggs. Thanks for listening.
Yep. I'm Diane Neubauer.
See you next time.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.